some other narcotics-related charges. He's presently on probation. He also has another conviction for a firearm charge. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure I forgot some things as I went, but I'm sure that we might have some questions that can refresh. Please.
And looking at one of the reports, when they mentioned that one of the officers said that he thought he felt a gun. Do you know if there actually was a gun?
There was no firearm found. You know, I don't want to speak for the officer, but I think there was some weight in the pocket, which could have been the narcotics.
Describe the scene around the officers, because you hear people yelling and screaming and videotaping, and here they're making up and writing, and the scene around it. Did they fear for their lives? Was there anger and aggression?
Whenever you're in a situation like this, Bob, you're always concerned about your surroundings and that others may join or assist the defendant. Really, we had officers responding to the area, which didn't inhibit the safety of the two officers with Mr. Bryant. We actually had officers that remained at the scene. They cleaned the blood from both the parties, and they actually stayed and talked to a lot of residents that were out there. This is kind of police work that is diverging from that old way of doing business, and I think we're just going to continue with that. Each and every one we make is, you know, we're going to keep showing. I'm not going to make any definitive conclusions.
Chief, did the residents who were interviewed, did they confirm what the detectives said had happened?
Actually, that'll be done by Internal Affairs later on.
Chief, getting to the scene where the video is shot, just procedurally, the man was not going to the ground voluntarily. They were trying to restrain him. Procedurally, did the officers do the right thing there?
Procedurally, and we are looking from at least the second floor down, or maybe possibly even the third floor porch area. When I did look at it, you know, the strikes were to his legs as they're trying to bring him to the ground. You know, we're going to find that out later on in life as we interview both officers again a little more in-depthly. But right now, we're going to wait to see how that pans out.
Chief, the use of less lethal force report says that the amount of force used by the officer was appropriate and proportional to the resistance used by the suspect. Was that report made before you had access to the video?
Which document are you referring to?
The use of less lethal force. So had your officer, had Sergeant Rutkowski, I think that's who wrote this, had a chance to see that video, or were they relying on the comments from the police officer at the time?
No, that report was completed probably into the early morning hours of Monday, so that would be prior to the video actually hitting Facebook and hitting the public.
So
it may have been reviewed by the supervisor later on that day, but it was completed prior to the video.
So does that, from your comments before, does that mean that you'll be reevaluating whether or not the use of force when it comes to the stick was appropriate?
Sure.
Okay. And then one other question is that it looks from the report that the officer who filed the report doesn't quantify, and granted, I get it that it's a heated moment, but the number of times he struck Mr. Bryant. Once he says I struck him, and then he says I struck him 2 more times. By a regular count, it's maybe 10. What do we make of that?
It's not uncommon. You know, I'm a veteran of the you know, police shootings from my earlier days. When I ask the officer how many times you shot, and he says once or twice, and I have all sorts of casings. It's a very volatile, excitable situation, and we see this quite a bit, that the officer doesn't report every single strike. You know, I was out the other night, and you know, we thought we heard shots, and we looked to each other, and we said, how many do you count? And we were entirely different, myself and the deputy chief.
So let me just go back just to be clear. Even though this use of force report says it was appropriate, what's the department doing now? You're going to reevaluate. What's the process? You're going to reevaluate that?
What's the process? The process actually is this. If there was no continued investigation by by Internal Affairs, the process would then end at the use of force. You know, around the country, use of forces are kind of resisted by police departments. We've been using them for years. It's an actual report that says what type of use of force did you use and why you used it. And at that time, if there was no continued complaint, it would have ended there. Now, I see in police work, when we talk about continued complaints, is I'm seeing as I sit as administrator that not always do people want to make internal affairs complaints. So that puts me in a difficult situation where I have to make a decision whether I open an investigative file or just wait until. I prefer to open an investigative file. It protects not only the citizen, the officer, and the entire city as a whole, because there's no statute of limitations, as far as I'm aware of, to make complaints against officers. There is a 2-year window of time, I believe, to make a civil complaint. So I have a myriad of things to look after.
So you're opening an IAD report investigation now?
Yes.
Okay. And then you might reevaluate whether or not that use of force was appropriate.
That is the process, yes.
I just want to follow up on the community. You know, it's an excitable situation. You've been working with faith leaders. How are you guys doing with that? Because you see that and people are yelling and screaming. It seems very excitable, but are they getting the right message? Is there still more work to be done? Because there's definitely a rub between the community and the police.
Bob, it's like a marriage. There's always work to be done, and you continually have to work at it every single day. So let's consider first from the video what didn't happen in there after the incident. The man was taken for appropriate medical treatment. We didn't have rocks, we didn't have bottles, we didn't have huge crowds. That's officers explaining their position to folks out there. So what do you see now? You actually see a police department that is turning out information. And what were the old days, Bob?
Didn't know or hear anything for 10 days.
At least, right? I'm sorry to ask questions back. But yeah, that is the way it goes. That you don't hear anything. We say, okay, we turn it over to another agency. The agency will tell you. Now you're getting a much different look about how a police department in the modern day should be informing its public.
Did you meet with the president and the Hartford NAACP earlier?
Yes.
Actually,
my brother's keeper. My brother's keeper are concerned citizens. They're Mr. Ansari from the NAACP. There's actually several different social members out there that have great groups, Hartford Communities That Care, and the reverends and ministers from around the city. They enrolled in my brother's keepers to do good out there and to actually talk about the transparency.
And how did that meeting go?
It went very well, as always. They had some very difficult questions. They pointed out the same matter Jeff had between the difference in strikes. So it's a give and take.
Are you expecting any kind of organized protesting? Did they give you any indication whether there would be some kind of civil action taken, protesting?
I have no indication of that right now.
The officers involved, are they on paid administrative leave right now, or is that just
Officer Fogg is not. Detective Salkeld is on compensatory injury for his broken nose.
As far as the Facebook, if this was posted on Facebook, you heard him say it right there. Social media, it's a huge thing these days. As of 1 o'clock today, over 100,000 views, 4,000 shares. What would you say to the community when it comes to that? I'm assuming it would be, you know, the full story is not shown in this video.
Yeah, and that's why partially I'm here. You have to see what we see from beginning to end. And what you see is the end. Would I prefer some body cameras on officers? Absolutely. You get to see the whole incident as it unwinds, and they're very ugly in nature, and the sounds are very ugly, but you get to see the whole picture. But that's something we'll have to negotiate.
Chief, can you explain to us, I'm not a police officer, so I don't have the training, but you know, when one of the officers has Bryant in his hands, containing him, and he's, you know, hitting the baton, can you elaborate on that? Is that, you know, what you train them to do?
Well, obviously, Julie, they're trying to bring him to the ground so they can contain him and handcuff him. And you see at the end of the handcuffing, everything is all over, isn't it? Officer Fogg puts his baton on the ground, he hits the ground with it, he collapses it, he puts it away. So the training model was followed. Plus, you know, the hits were to the lower legs. Go down, go down, go down. You know, I'd like to see a closer view. I'd like to see other people that are out there with these videos. But overall, I have to consider it when it comes to me in the big picture of things from beginning to end.
And now people back on that street in that neighborhood are saying that they felt that he was complying, and the officers didn't have to continue doing that. What might you say to them?
I'd ask them to review the entire picture. You know, what distance where they were from, what was their angle, what was their perspective. Did they know what happened before? There's a lot to consider here. It's not in a vacuum. That video should not be considered in a vacuum.
You said that you're in favor of body cameras. What about people in the public videotaping this with their cell phones? The excessive force bill just passed yesterday that gives some protection to members of the public to videotape police activity within reason.
Right, within reason is the key there, John, because yes, do you want them videotaping an active crime scene or somebody's family member that's had some demise? No, you don't. But yes, they're out there. We're aware of it. I tell every officer, if you don't think you've been captured on video or audio 30 times today, you're foolish, because you have been, and you folks have been too. Whether you walk into my police department, the parking lot, or come through the city streets, you're captured. So it's out there. It's a fact of life now.
Chief, sorry to keep coming back to the same point, but
Yeah.
just to be clear, you're reviewing the use of force when it comes to the baton.
Actually, we're going to